African-American activist Malcolm X commented on the cultural connotations and consequences of the term in his 1963 speech, Message to the Grassroots, wherein he explained that during slavery there were two types of slaves: house Negroes, who worked in the master's house, and field Negroes, who performed outdoor manual labor. He characterized the house Negro as having a better life than the field Negro, and thus being unwilling to leave the plantation, and potentially more likely to support existing power structures that favored whites over blacks. Malcolm X identified with the field Negro.
To understand this, you have to go back to what young brother here referred to as the house Negro and the field Negro. Back during slavery, there was two kinds of slaves. There was the house Negro and the field Negro. The house Negro, they lived in the house with master. They dressed pretty good. They ate good because they ate his food, what he left. They lived in the attic or the basement, but still they lived near their master. And they loved their master more than the master loved himself. They would give their life to save their master's house quicker than the master would. If the master's house caught on fire, the house Negro would fight harder to put the blaze out than the master would. If the master got sick, the house Negro would say, "What's the matter, boss?" "We sick. We sick." He identified himself with his master more than his master identified with himself. And if you came to the house Negro and said, "Let's run away, let's escape, let's separate," that house Negro would look at you and say, "Man, you crazy. What you mean separate? Where is there a better house than this?" On that same plantation, there was the field Negro. The field Negro, those were the masters. There was always more Negroes in the field than there was Negroes in the house. The Negro in the field caught hell. He ate leftovers. In the house, they ate high up on the hog. The Negro in the field didn't get nothing but what was left of the insides of the hog. The field Negro was beaten from morning till night. He lived in a shack, in a hut. He wore cast-off clothes. And he hated his master. I say he hated his master. He was intelligent. That house Negro loved his master. But that field Negro, remember, they were in the majority. And they hated the master.
As we learn in the last chapter, this narrative between the house Negro and the field Negro is historically inaccurate. Enslaved peoples who worked the enslaver's house often didn't live in the enslaver's house. They lived in the same accommodations as all the enslaved peoples on the plantation. Gifts and privileges were given to create division and to subdue the protest from an enslaved person during a rape. They were bribes to make the habitual everyday rape less work for the enslaver. They were not privileges given because the enslaver considered them to be white. And just in case I haven't said it enough, enslaved people who worked in the plantation home were selected based on overall attractiveness, but mostly based on skills and abilities. Attractiveness was overall more based on features than skin color, because enslaved house peoples who were light-skinned were born out of incestual, continuous rape of enslaved mothers, daughters, and granddaughters. Being a house Negro was not living high on the hog. Being close enough to the enslaver to receive on-demand abuse is not living high on the hog. Habitual violent rape is not living high on the hog. Whether conscious or subconscious, I believe this stereotype and narrative of the quote-unquote house Negro gets put on not only light-skinned black people, but black people that are raised close to whiteness or express themselves in ways that the black community considers close to whiteness. Being raised by parents or in a home that was completely out of your control does not automatically make you a race traitor or a quote-unquote house Negro based on the words of Malcolm X. Lewis Clark was born in Madison County, Kentucky in 1812 to an enslaved mother and enslaver father from Scotland. After escaping from his plantation in 1841, he reached Canada, and in 1845, he published a book, Narrative of the Sufferings of Lewis Clark. Lewis Clark believed that some house slaves were worse off than field slaves. Quote, "There were 4 house slaves in this family, including myself, and though we had not, in all respects, so hard work as the field hands, yet in many things our condition was much worse. We were constantly exposed to the whims and passions of every member of the family, from the least to the greatest. Their anger was wreaked upon us. Nor was our life an easy one in the hours of our toil or in the amount of labor performed. We were always required to sit up until all the family had retired. Then we must be up at early dawn in summer and before day in winter." Gad Human and James Walvin, the authors of Slave Work, a 2003 book, state, "The domestic life of whites was dominated by slave domestics. Visitors were struck by the huge numbers of black servants working in and around the homes of white people in their slave colonies. Nannies and nurses, cooks and washers, gardeners and cleaners, each and every conceivable domestic role was undertaken by slaves. Overwhelmingly, women, slave domestics, faced different problems from their contemporaries in the fields. Though perhaps better off materially, domestic slaves often had uncomfortable relations with their white owners. They faced all the potential aggravations of close proximity, from sexual threats to white women's dissatisfaction and anger." As in President Thomas Jefferson's household, the presence of lighter-skinned slaves as household servants was not merely an issue of skin color. Sometimes planters used mixed-race slaves as house servants or as favored artisans because they were children or other relatives. Several of Jefferson's household slaves were possibly children of his father-in-law, John Wales, and the enslaved woman, Betty Hemmings, who were inherited by Jefferson's wife upon her father's death. In turn, Jefferson himself had sexual relations with Betty and John Whaley's daughter, Sally Hemmings, the half-sister to Thomas Jefferson's wife.
Now, are you all the ones who supplied DNA?
My uncle, my
Your uncle
mother's
did.
brother.
My brother.
Yeah, he
Your
was a
brother
male line
did.
descendant that fit the bill.
Yes, and to continue the former discussion, I hate to tell everybody, but we're related to Martha Jefferson also. Therefore, we're related to Jefferson's children because Martha's father was John Wales, who fathered Sally Hemings. Right. Interestingly enough.
I wasn't even going to bring that up. That's right. Martha's father. So, okay,
Right.
Sally Hemings, who was the slave to Thomas Jefferson, was really the half-sister to Martha.
Right.
Thomas.
Right.
See, okay, I should have brought it up. I thought y'all knew that already. She was the half-sister to Martha.
Right.
That's right.
Right.
Wow.
So one way or another, we are related to the Jefferson family. You know, either both ways. So we're in, I guess.
We don't know how Sally Hemings would have identified herself. She was 3/4 European and 1/4 African. In 2 separate censuses taken near the end of her life, Hemings' race is recorded as white in one and as mulatto in the other, hinting at shifting notions of her identity. Of her surviving children, who were 7/8 European and 1/8 African, 3 passed as white and 1 identified as black. Race did not cement Beverly, Harriet, Madison, or Eston Hemings' status as slaves. It was the fact that their mother was enslaved. Children, no matter their racial background, inherited slavery from their mothers.
They are in slavery, there are not that many choices that they can make because the law is the thing that defined their society, their status for the most part. You really began to see it when Beverly and Harriet leave Monticello, Jefferson's son and daughter, leave Monticello to live as white people, meaning that they can't have any more easy access to their family. Now, it's pretty clear that they kept in contact, even people who passed for white, and it's sort of an interesting term, thinking of passing for white, because by Virginia law, they were 7/8 white and were therefore white. They did not have the one-drop rule that develops, you know, with Jim Crow and then and gets sort of really solidified in the 20th century. But one of the consequences is having to leave behind family. Now, while they're in slavery, they live like enslaved people, except to the extent that Jefferson allows them the sons at least, much more autonomy and treats the women differently. They don't have to go to the fields and do the kinds of things that are associated with enslaved women or lower class white women for that matter on farms. But you really get to see it as they are dispersed after the family begins to move apart, and some of them stay in the white community and some of them go to the white community and some of them stay in the black community. So what that really means is the loss of family and the loss of family ties, which have been very important in slavery. One of the things that I saw when I was working on the book is how close the family really was. I mean, they name one another after the kids. That's one of the confusing things about it. There are a lot of Sarah/Sallys, Marys, and Bettys. The racial aspect of it changes after they pass for white because they can't have the contact with their family, ready contact. They kept in some contact, but not the kind that they would have been able to have if they, remained black.
It's a system of oppression that privileges lighter skin tones over darker skin tones. One thing to remember about colorism versus racism is that color is not a synonym for race. People can be the same race and have different skin tones, and people can be different races and have very similar skin tones. What I experienced at 5 was an example of colorism because my sister and I have the same mother, we have the same father, we are the same race. So these women were distinguishing between us based on the particular shade of our complexions. Growing up in a household as a dark-skinned girl with a light-skinned mother and a light-skinned sister, the differences in how people treated us was very apparent to me. And the notion that I could not be a heartbreaker because I was darker-skinned showed up many more times throughout my life. And while heartbreaker status was supposedly inaccessible to me, heartbreak seemed readily available.
And here it is, tonight from Wakanda Forever Studios at the Black-owned network in Atlanta, Georgia. This is All Day Black. And now, folks, your host, the legendary Mr. Bob Parker.
Thank you, folks. Thank you. Yes. Good evening. Good lookings. This is your nightly game show host, Bob Parker, and this is All Day Black. Tonight's matchup is going to be one for the TV history books. For the first time on Are They Black, one of our contestants is white. Yes, we have an oppressor as a contestant tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Everyone say hi to Miss Colin Hazard. Her competitor tonight is returning champion, Black internet thought leader, Mr. Reverend X Luther Black. Wakanda Power Forever to Siway Jackson Jr. III. Give it up. Mr. Reverend X Wakanda Jackson Jr. solidified his championship status last week when he confirmed, unfortunately, that Beethoven was not black. Now, all right, folks, let's start with the rules of the game. Each of our contestants will take turns playing one round while their opponent, unable to see and hear, will be placed in the meaningless celebrity pop culture distraction historical reality proof room. Also known as America's white supremacist reinforcing control system chamber. During the contestant's turn, they will have 60 seconds to identify as many black people as they can from the screen. Each correct answer is worth 50 points. Each contestant can request up to 2 hints, but for each hint, their correct answer will lose 10 points in value. Okay, audience, y'all ready to watch our contestants? Let's get ready to play Are They Black? Now, as the returning champion, Mr. Black Forever Desaiwe Jr., you will get to go first. So let's have Miss Eisner escorted to the reality proof room. And Mr. Luther X. Black Jackson Jr. III, please step on up to the game board platform. Okay, and Mr. Colin Eisner is set in the reality proof room. Now, Mr. X Jr. III, are you ready? Solid, brother. Let's go ahead and get 60 seconds on the clock. Okay, Mr. X Jr. Are they black? I'm gonna need a hint. Does she like her grits savory or sweet? Yes, this young lady likes their grits sweet. I'm gonna ask for one more hint. Have they ever been to a Dave Matthews concert? No, this lady has not attended a Dave Matthews concert, but she does have a t-shirt. Interesting. Black. Okay, and that is 30 points on the board for Mr. Luther X. Are they black? That sister from Barbados? Black. Fantastic. That is 80 points on the board for our contestant. Are they black? Damn, son, I'm gonna need a hint for this one. Okay, contestant has asked for a hint. Here is a picture of their parents. That shorty a little light yellow bone, but black, I guess, legally. Contestant has decided the shorty is a little light, but legally black. And that is a fine answer, Dr. Reverend Wakanda X, ending the round with 120 points. Well, our champion has thrown in the full hat with that round, but will it be enough to keep the Are We Black Championship title? Stay tuned after these brief messages for our next round. Do you care for the suffering of others? Do you long for a sense of belonging and a feeling of wholeness? Do you think that there is more to life, something more beautiful and true? Well, don't let these foolish thoughts trouble you. Ask your doctor about capitalism. Capitalism is the most widely used prescription today to treat those suffering from love and hope. Its amazing effects work systematically by creating various coercive hierarchical power structures designed to benefit a privileged few at the expense of the majority. If that sounds too clinical, don't worry about how it works. It just does. This prescription includes convincing yourself that you will attain happiness by working hard all your life to make your unseen employers rich, for which you will be graciously promised a competitive wage and benefits, which should probably be considered free given rights. But no worries, soon you'll be praised for all of the things you buy with your limited income and the words you say that promote the status quo. This may distract you from having long-term relationships and enjoying the simple things in life, most of which the history of humanity has shown to do actually brings us well-being. Do not let that deter you. capitalism is truly the modern wonder. The more customers who use it, whether or not they want to, the more it will bring many great changes to our planet's future. We suggest that you continue to use capitalism even if you are allergic to any of its ingredients, which includes authoritarianism, hierarchical oppression, private property enforcement, illusionary political participation, alienation from direct democracy, freedom from freedom. The side effects include exhaustion, unfulfilling work, competition with strangers leading to alienation, depression, FOMO, unsustainable consumerism yet never having enough, obedience to those who don't care about you as a person, endless hours watching TV and social media, loss of self-determination, horrible working and living conditions abroad, environmental damage, guilt, denial, unrealized dreams, a wasted life, and even a hollow death. If you have any serious pre-existing conditions like anarchist or liberal socialist thoughts, seek immediate medical attention. Ask your doctor about capitalism. Our team of celebrities, corporate millionaires, and media organizations are here to reassure you that it's the best thing you can possibly have. Get prescribed capitalism today, so you can be a part of ending humanity, because saving it would mean you'd have to sacrifice all of your stuff. Welcome back, folks, to your favorite woke-ass nightly game show. I'm Fob Parker, and this is Are They Black? Real quick, on a serious note, folks, I would like to share a special message. Make sure to get your pets spayed and neutered, as well as get access to your underground reproductive railroad map to the states that actually have legal abortion in our country right now. And if you don't have access to that, you might want to look into getting yourself spayed or neutered. Now, back to the show. During the break, we have went ahead and switched our contestants. So Mr. Reverend Black Luther Jr. has already been put in our reality proof room, blocking them from any commotion or conversation or even this round with Miss Colin Eisen. There, Miss Colin Eisen, would you go ahead and step up on the game board platform? Miss Eisen, are you ready? Okay then, let's play Are They Black? Miss Colin Eisen, are they black? Yes, she's definitely black. Good job, Miss Colin Eisen. Starting strong with 50 points on the board. Okay, let's get into the next one. Doja. Black. Definitely. So, Miss Colin Eisen, I hadn't even put the picture on the board yet. Oh, well, with a name like Doja, that is a black person. Well, a white person wouldn't go around calling himself Doja. Duh. Well, okay then. I guess that puts 100 points on the board for Miss Colin. Are they black? Oh, black. It was pretty obvious when she used all that voodoo magic on Prince Harry. I wonder how dark-skinned that baby gonna end up turning out. Ah, and that is the buzzer! Everyone, our new reigning champion with 150 points, taking out our long-standing champion, winning the social hierarchy game of life, Miss Colin Eisen. Oh, I won? Look at that. Yay! Well, that's all for tonight, folks. Thanks for joining us. This has been Fob Barker with Are They Black?
2 hours later.
Am I black? Am I black? I think I am. Something I may not have mentioned on my channel before is I am actually biracial. My mom is half black, and as far as I know, the white side of my family is German, but they haven't like done a DNA test, so it's just like based on, you know, passing it down through the family. And then my dad was 100% African American, and that makes me 3/4. But as you can see, I am also dark-skinned. I would be considered dark-skinned. I have been considered dark-skinned. I have gotten all of those comments like, you're really pretty for a dark-skinned girl. I've always considered myself a dark-skinned girl, but as I've been doing more research on like pro-black issues and some of the channels I follow, there's a lot of videos on how like biracial women aren't black. And I don't know if they leave room for this gray area. I am biracial. I look like this. I would be considered mixed, but obviously everyone in my life is going to identify me as black. I feel black. I want to be able to promote black messages and support the black community. I want to collaborate with other black women. Like, so I struggle with this because I'm like, where is the space for me? Am I black or am I not? Should I start identifying as biracial? Would that confuse people? Is that part of our societal misunderstanding of biracial? And I don't know. And then what does that mean when it comes down to like colorism and being biracial? Because again, you have this situation where there are 100% black people who are very light-skinned. I've seen many different families where you see 3 or 5 siblings from the same 2 black parents, and they're like 3 or 4 different shades. So I guess I'm trying to wonder, like, does it matter how you identify inside, or does it matter how people are going to identify you or group you outside, in the outside world? Because in the outside world, I'm black. In the DNA world, I'm technically biracial. In my mind, heart, and soul, I'm black. I've always said, kind of in a joking manner, but in my mind, mentally, when I think, is someone black or not, I think about if it comes down to life or death. If the KKK, if the alt-right, if Hitler comes back, you know, a version of it, and they get to decide who lives or dies, I don't think they're going to check your DNA and say, oh, they're biracial. I think they're going to look at your skin color. I think, again, there's this gray area of people who can be white passing or even like Hispanic passing in the real world. And that's like its own separate issue. But then we also need to leave space for people who are biracial who can't pass as anything but black. Nope. Most people in my life that I've known don't even really understand that I'm biracial. Like, it's not something I heavily bring up because, like, I've always been black. Always been black. I know I've had many times in my life where I've definitely been told I'm not black enough, but I think that has more to do with like where I was raised. Again, that's gonna be a whole other video, but I was raised in a very white area and my adopted parents are white. So I've definitely been told I'm not black enough. So like that's a whole other like insecurity I've had in my life, especially as I have been more vocal about pro-black issues. But at the end of the day, I think if we share a common goal, we shouldn't really care about the little things in between, right? And so whether you consider me biracial or black or whatever you consider me from the outside, I'm still going to speak to these issues, and I'm still going to live my life like I'm black, and I'm still going to support the black message and black women. And also because when I go out into the real world, I'm not treated as biracial. I'm treated as 100%. 100% you're too loud. We think you steal. You're pretty for a dark-skinned black woman. Like that's my real world. That's my real life. No matter how properly people think that I speak, it's just, you gotta leave room for not everyone's just half and half or 100%. Like, there's other percentages in there. There's totally, like, there's so many other mixes. I don't even know if I'm technically 75 and 25%. I want to do a DNA test, but then my like conspiracy theorist INTJ brain doesn't want the government to have my DNA, but then they might already have it. I don't know. I may need to do a test just so I can understand if I'm black or how black I am. Who knows? Maybe I'm only 50% and I don't even know. I don't know. I legit don't know. I don't know. So I made this video. Let me know if you know. I think in America, unfortunately, the one drop rule has kind of applied, where if you are, 5%, 10%, back in slavery times, you was still a slave. I identify as black. I will always identify as black. Pretty sure everyone else will always identify me as black, even though I am biracial.
When things are changing rapidly, we can respond in one of two ways. One way is to close ranks with those we consider to be us and try to exclude everyone else. That's othering. Othering comes in many forms, but one of the most virulent is racism. The other way is to expand our conception of us to include as many people as we can. That's belonging. Which way will we choose? Well, that depends on the story we tell ourselves.
So I think the two dominant stories. One is the fear. Those people out there, they're out to get you. They're not like you. You need to be afraid of them, build a wall or kill them. And the other one is one of hope and love. It's like, we share something. We can create something. We share the earth. We share each other. And we can learn from each other. So those are two dominant stories. So one is one of fear. One is of hope.
Fear or hope? These two stories have been around as long as there have been people. They coexist because the impulse towards both was literally wired into us.
Colorism, quote-unquote, close to whiteness, house Negro, mixed instead of black. All of these issues seem to stem around the black community creating belonging through othering. And the reason why we do this is because we have unhealed, unaddressed generational trauma collectively as a community. Rejection of mixed black people or transracial adoptees by the black community is exactly what white people want. That was the goal for all of the many systems of family disconnection for peoples of color in order to finish the final steps of the complete alienation and sanitization of our culture from our daily lives, as well as being able to pass these practices down to our children. Belonging is one of the #1 desires for human existence. It's what gives us purpose. As we deprive people of belonging, we cease to see their true humanity.
We have a brain that's very good at classifying. We're very good at thinking about who our own group is and who may be threatening to our own group. And I think there are two systems in our brain that sometimes work against each other. So one is the system of fight and flight, and this is a system in the brain that is very prominent in lower species like amphibians and reptiles, and it essentially is involved with protecting oneself from other animals and attacking other animals for food. And then we have this other grander side in our brain, and this is the part of the brain that is involved with nurturance, empathy, self-awareness, being able to think more broadly about the survival of the planet, being able to think outside ourselves and thinking about the importance of others.
Deep down, we all want to belong, to connect, to build things together, to solve problems together. In our heart of hearts, we know that that's what brings out the best in us. But if we live in fear, it becomes more likely that our reptilian side will take over instead.
I think what's happening is you see someone or a group of people that have a shared characteristic. It could be something external or something in their behavior or something in their way of living, and you generalize, you mark those people, and you start to build all kinds of theories around those people, and you confuse those theories and beliefs as reality. And in that process, you lose sight of the shared identity of people, the shared substance of people.
When we lose sight of our interconnectedness, our interdependence, well, then our humanity drains away. And we stop inventing all the incredible things like schools, libraries, civilizations that come from our species' genius for working together, for helping one another.
Black individuals who are defensive or protective against mixed-race Black people, transracial adoptees, or Black people that were raised in predominantly white communities, I believe are just responding to both the trauma experience in their life as well as generational trauma, which has taught them to look for the red flags and signs of whiteness in order to protect themselves and their community for survival. This can sometimes trigger fight, flight, or fawn responses to interactions Black peoples who have these life experiences. This response can also be triggering to the mixed person or transracial adoptee because they genuinely believe that they are not a threat to Black people or the Black community. They are most oftenly, authentically, and desperately just looking for community and belonging. I believe by coming together through each other's similarities, rather than focusing on othering each other based on differences, we can begin to be unified and empowered in a way that is disruptive and revolutionarily unstoppable.
And I think Bel Air realizes this and wants the show to play this relationship up in the same way. They know the audience wants to see Will and Carlton as Batman and Robin again, but they want to make us earn it. And I think that's why Carlton was written in a way to make him so unlikable initially. In real life, I probably wouldn't like a Carlton either, but that's why I think the character is so interesting and well written, because Carlton is forcing us to take a three-dimensional look at a Black trope and archetype that we know very well, but have never liked very much, which is the Oreo. Black media, hell, Black history is full of sellouts, coons, Oreos, whatever you want to call them. I feel like the last decade or so, we've seen a much better deconstruction of this archetype because they become much more difficult to escape. And we've also seen like more of a deconstruction in terms of where it comes from, as Black people who have had that fly in the milk experience get to tell more stories about what it was like for them growing up and why some of them maybe landed where they are now. That feeling of not being Black enough is still not fully fleshed out, but that's a feeling that a lot of Black people, nerds, weirdos, etc., have felt at times, especially when they're younger.
African American culture, on the other hand, has a far different flashpoint, a different origin, because of how they experienced slavery. While all across the African diaspora, slavery is a salient point in all of our stories. African Americans have a totally different plight. Their experience is in the context of being cloistered with their colonizers. They literally live shoulder to shoulder with people whose ancestors have hung, chained, whipped, and raped them. I'm from a predominantly Black country. I don't have to subject myself to that dynamic. But where you could tell African Americans, these people who are far removed from their African heritage, Where you can tell them to go when you tell them to go back to their country? Because the United States is not only their home, it's their crime scene. So their culture is in the context of that. Their culture is in spite of that.
When we start thinking about those black youth that grow up in all white areas and why their performance of blackness doesn't quite work, and we need to be empathetic to what that is. Will doesn't have the same alienating experiences of having to come of age under the white gaze and police his behavior at all times. Going back to my homeboy, Foreign Man in Foreign Land, we had a conversation once upon a time about why there's persistent conflict between black immigrants who have an experience primarily in their, all black nation versus us here in America, because they come here and they see our energy and the way we behave, and to them, without understanding what it's like to grow up next to your oppressors and colonizers, they don't get it initially. That takes a toll and changes you at your core. A similar thing is happening with Carlton. Carlton has to grow up around this all-white community who constantly subject him to a sense of otherness. And while I'm sure Will would gladly trade places with him, Will at least got to appreciate the fact that the community that he mostly relied on was also all black and gave him a sense of grounding in a culture that was wholly productive and beneficial to him. And so Will doesn't get that initially. He has no empathy for the types of compromises and sacrifices and traumas that Carlton has had to make probably since childhood. When Will sees Carlton's white friends all singing Hot Nigga, he responds accordingly as he normally would, letting them know that that won't fly around him and putting Carlton in a bad situation, not considering that Carlton has probably had to make peace with the usage of this word since he was in middle school. Carlton probably reacted the same way that Will is now in the past, but with no real black community to retreat to, he probably had to just let that shit slide.
I don't believe in performing blackness. Now stay with me here. Obviously, I understand the modification of black culture, but I do not believe black people raised in white communities are ever performing blackness, nor are black people who are raised in predominantly black communities. You cannot perform something you are. And this goes for all of us in the black community. We are never performing blackness. If it feels like a performance, then what you are doing is either not authentic to who you are, or the space and audience is not safe or supportive of any kind of black expression or representation. White people perform culture. We are the culture. Growing up with a white gaze in your home means there is never a break. There is never rest or refueling by being grounded in a community that is sharing in the struggles of black oppression. Sometimes mixed children or transracial adoptees don't even know that systematic racism exists. So all the trauma and struggles that they are experiencing seem to be their own responsibility. There seems to be no other conclusion than it is your fault. You didn't work hard enough. You weren't charismatic. You weren't pretty enough. And unfortunately, most of the time, there was no one in your life to tell you anything different. There is no refuge. Four weeks ago, I was almost done with this documentary, and the script was half the size. And then Professor Flowers dropped a video called Moving Forward after being on a hiatus for months. I immediately stopped what I was doing and watched the entire hour and a half, and then sat back and cried my eyes out. Her story, her experience, her vulnerability, and sharing it with us moved my soul and gave me new insight for topics I wanted to cover in the second half of this documentary. It was healing. I highly suggest watching it and supporting her work. We need many more voices like hers, because we have so much more healing to do. Professor Flowers discussed the narrative that people, and yes, black people, perpetuate about transracial adoptees and how they should be grateful because there is an assumption that the material privilege they may have received from their parents made their life experiences as a black person less oppressive. But the way she says it is so much more kind and eloquent, so I'm just gonna roll the clip. Roll the clip. I need to shut up. Roll the clip.
The type of comment that I've received is that my white family gave me a good life, and I should be grateful. I see these kinds of comments a lot when there are adoptees who talk about struggles around adoption, but it was especially gross to see comments like this be used to push a narrative about how I'm ungrateful to my white family, and that I went to genocide white people because of my ungratefulness to them. Regardless of someone's race, don't assume that an adopted family gave a child a good life. You just don't know. But especially when it comes to transracial adoptions. Transracial meaning that a family adopts a child of a different race, not that the person has changed races. There are so many racial issues that come with these kinds of adoptions. There is a problem with white families thinking that they can help Black children by helping that child assimilate to whiteness. That in itself is a problem. Even if a family can offer financial stability or a good home life, which is not always the case. Growing up in an environment that punishes you if you try to appreciate Black history and culture, but rewards you for assimilating into white culture is a traumatizing environment to grow up in. So don't say that to adoptees. Don't assume that they were given a good life simply because they were adopted. And don't assume that the adopted family was also financially stable and had a healthy family dynamic, because that's also not always the case. So this is another thing that I just do want to expand on, actually. So a lot of times I'll see people say that adopted kids should just be grateful that somebody took them in. Not only is that not true, it's an extremely bigoted thing to say to someone. Adopted kids are still children. And if you're an adult, not prepared to have kids, but are choosing to have kids, that's on the adult, not the child. It's never a child's obligation to be thankful for being brought up in a harmful environment, adopted or not. I think that's something that people don't really understand about adoption, is that you are specifically going out of your way to have a kid. Sometimes people can accidentally get pregnant and then decide to have a kid, but you don't actually accidentally adopt a child. So if you're going to intentionally adopt a kid, don't put them into an unhealthy environment. That responsibility is on the adult, not the child. So if you're going to be adopting kids with this mentality that this kid needs to be grateful no matter what happens, then you shouldn't be adopting. Stop putting that on adoptees. It's dehumanizing. Just as biological children don't need to feel grateful and obviously have a complex relationship with their parents where there's often love and also areas where they feel let down, it's the same with adoptees. So please don't condescend to adoptees and let us be fully human. It honestly feels dehumanizing to me that I have to even say that adoptees still have these human experiences of these complex relationships with your parents, just as biological children do. With that said, when there's conflict between my parents and I feel really sad about it. Most people want to get along with their parents, wish that they could, and being adopted doesn't make that any different. When there is conflict with my parents, I would like for there to be a way to work out that conflict, as many people wish with their parents as well. And the fact that people saw a Black adopted person talking about colonialism, and they thus concluded that I wanted to genocide my family, is so disgusting. Me being Black, me being adopted, doesn't change that I love my family. And the fact that you were able to see a Black adoptee and make these conclusions about white genocide, so disgusting, so racist. I have no words. I grew up around white conservative Christians and I've never experienced something so racist. Not when I was called the N-word, not when parents didn't want me hanging out with their kids because they see that I'm Black, not the racial profiling that I grew up with. None of my experiences compared to this. Absolutely disgusting.
I really didn't want this to be like some big thing, but I honestly hoped I'd never have to deal with this kind of shit again. Throughout my childhood, I was harassed by Black people for acting white or trying to be white, like just in the way I carried myself. And I didn't understand what that meant because I didn't have a reference. I didn't have any white friends. I didn't know any white people. So like, I didn't know what that meant. So fast forward, my family moves to a new school district, and all of a sudden, white people everywhere, all in the school and everything, even in my neighborhood. And the Black people in my school are giving me the same shit I got at my old school. Except this time, you can throw a few homophobic slurs in there. So after a while, naturally, I start making friends with white people. And I don't get the same shit from them. We're friends, we're connecting, we're hanging out, you know what I mean? They invite me to sit with them at lunch and we hang out and talk and we have a lot of things in common. And through them, I meet other Black people that are like me, who have had my same experiences, who are also queer. Moving on to high school, the population is still mostly white, but there's also different types of people other than just white kids and Black kids. I'm meeting a lot more people of color. I'm meeting people who are like religiously variant. Like I'm meeting a lot of different types of people. And I'm becoming friends with all of them. And I form a group of people that I can be myself around. Most of them were white because, again, mostly white school district. But a good majority of them, come to find out, were queer. So you add on that extra layer of identity, and you've got a completely different kind of friend group. And of course, my parents start to notice the kind of friends I'm bringing over and the kind of friends I'm hanging out with. And I'm in high school, I've got my license, I'm going out in public, I've got my own money, I can do things out in public with my friends. So they sit me down and they talk to me about racial injustice in America. And after that conversation, I had to come to terms with the fact that there are a lot of white people that I probably couldn't trust. I would hear a lot of really inappropriate jokes, and of course, we're in high school, none of us really know any better. And I was making those jokes too, but that was when I thought that racism was like a personal problem that everyone had to fucking come to terms with. But after that conversation with my parents, I stopped making those jokes. And over the past decade, I've had to figure out the white people that I can trust and the ones that I can't. And whether you believe it or not, I've met quite a few that I can. The ones that aren't afraid to talk about race, the ones that acknowledge their prejudices and their biases, the ones that actively send reparations, the ones that do the research themselves and don't ask me to explain it. I've built a strong connection with a lot of different types of people. And here you are commenting this bullshit like I'm supposed to be ashamed of that.
But for these boys that grow up in these all-white areas that feel compromised in their blackness, they don't really get solid images of blackness to mimic from the media. They may not have the best role models around them. They probably are surrounded by black men and women who are sellouts themselves, or they wouldn't have taken their kids out to the fucking suburbs to raise them among all white people. Stop doing that shit to your kids, y'all. I'm sorry. It's valuable to engage with this empathetically to hopefully keep it from continuing to happen. There's a million Candace Owenses and Carltons around us right now that feel alienated from their blackness and are faced with ostracism from their white peers and revulsion from their black peers. And when these boys also try to manifest a concept of productive masculinity in the process, the shit just becomes a mess. While we may not like it, we have to start engaging with the fact that that particular Oreo flying the milk experience is still a black experience, and that those people need empathy and community even when our blacknesses don't match. We should still call them on their bullshit. Still treat the ones that refuse to correct their behavior with the appropriate level of derision. But when they're young, when they're Carlton's age, just like with Will, they need support.
These misconceptions, as well as the mutual marginalization of other black people by black people, stem from anti-blackness, which is taught in American schooling, as well as white supremacist revisionist history lessons that I've learned in my own education system. Institutions have been built in the name of securing and fortifying, buttressing and bolstering that institution of white supremacy. It needs the diaspora to be at war with one another. It's the same understanding of dividing and conquering the African continent, the African pie. There needs to be internecine bloodshed in order for this bigotry to continue to live like a vampire that sips on the spilt blood of blackness.
You say is really white culture. What about black culture? Can you really sit and define what it means to be black without reverting to stereotypes or essentialization? And what I mean by essentialization is thinking that these are the things that fundamentally make you a quote unquote black person or a quote unquote white person. How can there be a uniformed black or white? And I'm just using the binary for now, but how can there be a uniformed black or a uniformed white when people who look black or white or any color for that matter are all over the world and don't have the same even cultural identity? And even if they're all from the same region or area, there can be a lot of differences in that too. Like, even if we kept it to just America, again, how can you really define Black American culture in a way that doesn't just flatten blackness or treat all Black Americans as a monolith? To skeptics, even race as a social construct, aka race as a social creation, is a falsehood and can actually end up being a slippery slope to naturalism if you're not careful.
Now, my contention with the social constructionist position, which is often the default position in American society, is that at the same time we talk about race and call it a social construction, we tend to almost always and inevitably talk about race in naturalist ways. That is, a person's race is dictated not because of their skin color, but because of who their parents are, who their grandparents are, their family line, right? Their DNA. in that way, it is my argument that we unintentionally uphold a naturalist and ultimately racist position and view of race.
So after spending last weekend for my birthday with my tribe, my core community group of friends, and being able to have a few more discussions about this topic and about my own life experiences, I had some additional thoughts that I wanted to add into this segment. And I want to kind of discuss the psychological cognitive dissonance that is going on with Black children who are raised by white parents. In particular, I'm going to talk about my situation, so this is going to be a white narcissistic mother and how we are raised, the perspective of resources that they can give us compared to how we are going to be treated or perceived in the world. So I was, and I have confirmed this in my research and discussion with other humans that have had similar experiences, I was programmed and taught to expect a privilege in the world that wasn't given to me. I was raised in a household where my female figure taught me to navigate the world with white woman, vulnerable, virgin, pure entitlement. And this is why when I was younger and I was still finding myself, I oftentimes was described as stuck up or conceited or thought way too highly of myself. And I look back now and things I said absolutely came off that way, but also I think it was a strength because it was protecting me from a lot of the narratives that are put on and given to Black people within this country. This narrative that my mother put in my head as a child has protected and kept me safe in my life. Not all the time, don't get me wrong. It's also got me in some conflict. So reinforcing the white patriarchy was instilled in me as a child, even though I fought it, because it's not really who I am as a more dominant, non-binary, femme-presenting person. I was a tomboy growing up, like, wore nothing but, like, guys' clothes and, like, basketball jerseys until I think I was about 13, and I was in Old Navy. I will never forget this because it was traumatizing and life-changing. I tried on a pair of flare leg jeans that were just coming in style. I had never put on a fitted pair of jeans in my life. I had always wore like baggy fucking like Jinkos or FUBU. And what happened was I put on the jeans, I came out of the dressing room, and it was the first time that I had gotten genuine, authentic validation and attention from my narcissistic white mother as a woman, as like an adult, as like a young, developing woman. I was always treated like a child. I mean, I was a child, so that makes sense. But I'm just saying, like, I was going through puberty, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was the first time that, like, parentals in that space, like, gave a validation of beauty, of femininity. And it was also traumatizing because then I went extremely the other way. But it was never because, it was always performative. Especially growing up, for my mother. The way that I express my femininity is not how I was taught in my household, the way I was raised. So my mom's validation motivated me to continue to do those behaviors to receive more validation because, again, belonging. I was raised, and it was instilled in me, I want to emphasize this, okay? I was raised to believe that I am deserving by just showing up and being put together. And I'm sorry if white women are not ready to hear this, but this is part of how you are raised, unfortunately. I am deserving by just showing up and being put together. I have nothing to prove to nobody. Any privilege I receive is a blessing and gift from the Lord Jesus Christ, our Savior. Amen. Because we are pure and holy virgin Christians. I deserve to be in any room, to take up space, and to be heard no matter what. And when it comes to my career, as long as I work hard, I deserve and am entitled to all of those things as well. I grew up under the narrative and programming that my existence is deserving of celebration constantly as this woman. Holy fuck, I'm just realizing it. I was raised in a household that taught me to be as entitled as a lady enslaver of the fucking antebellum era. This is why I've always said I am actually really glad that I was not raised in more money and that my parents have been such cruel people about sharing money with me as an adult. I'm glad for that because I would be a pretentious cunt, okay? I wouldn't be doing this shit. I would. It wouldn't be good, okay? Can you imagine me running around here with this thought process but also having like all the access to resources? Not gonna be good. Scares me, actually, to think that. I could have been one of the most evilest capitalists. The female Kissinger. This is all a game, okay? Being a white woman in America, especially if you are from money, especially if you are pretty, it is all a game. And I'm gonna be perfectly honest, I am estranged from most of my family, and part of why I am estranged is because my mom's inability to deal and process with the fact that she taught me the game and then I played it better than her, even though the game was not built for me. And again, I think that this narrative has been a strength and a weakness. It's been a positive and a negative in my life, and I've had to grow and heal and process to see when I can use it as a tool, as a strength, and when I need to shut the fuck up because I'm being a bitch. But it's taken time to really process and have friends that care about me enough to really have this difficult conversation of like, what is it? What is it about me, about how I present that is turning people in the Black community off? Because I'm on your team. I'm on your team. And I needed to understand it so I could improve how I present, how I'm presenting my information. And this is kind of what we got down to. I've never walked in a room and felt like I don't belong here. That wasn't a narrative I was raised with. I have never met a white male authoritarian figure, boss, coach, elected official, that I had anxiety or fear talking to as a peer, taking up is just as much space as they did in the room, if not more. That's never been uncomfortable for me. It has probably been unsafe for me at times, but there's this crazy thing about not understanding the danger you're in. It doesn't affect you till later. My experiences in my 20s, partying, having relationships, being a stripper, I was rescued and protected by white people often. I held space in those social groups just as much, if not more, than the white women. The male counterparts, even though they paid for everything in our social group because they were financially privileged, I was looked at as an equal to the men in our group. And just to give some more context, not looked at as an equal, like I was looked at as a man, I was looked at as an equal, as in power and how much space to take up, like when it came to figuring out planning and organizing details, or like those organic moments where like the more feminine people in a group break off, the more masculine people break off. I was welcomed into the masculine spaces. And this isn't to brag, this isn't a like, oh, look at me. I don't look at those moments in my life as things to brag about. Now I look back at them and I go, holy shit, I put myself, wow, why did I, oh man, that motherfucker was racist. So I just want to add that in there. It's traumatizing. It hurts in the feelings, wherever those are. I didn't know about colorism or light skin privilege until I moved to Texas and black men started telling me that I was pretty for a dark-skinned girl, or smart for a dark-skinned girl, or well put together, or well-mannered, or add any other fucking absolutely harmful stereotype. That would be how they would introduce themselves, actually, before they'd even like ask me my name. As an adult trying to find community, I was completely ignorant of the fact that sometimes I perpetuated anti-blackness. I didn't know. We don't talk about race in white households. Remember, we don't see color. Race isn't a thing. So where would I have gotten the foundation, the context, the information to know what would be anti-black? I didn't until I had loving people in my life that were willing to mentor me, were willing to teach me, instead of making fun of me and calling me names. And I wish people who grew up within black spaces and black communities would actually do this more when it comes to mixed people or people who grew up in predominantly white communities. Please teach us. Please just pull us to a side and like educate us on some shit, because half the time we don't know. And that generally is probably not our intent, to be hurtful, harmful, or anti-black. Another struggle as I was coming of age was that because we don't talk about race, because I had none of this historical context, because I didn't understand these things, any roadblocks, any opportunities I didn't get, things that came up in my life that most people would very easily be able to attribute to a racist systematic structure, I didn't have that context. So it was my fault, personally, that I didn't get that job, that that person didn't want to see me again, that I was treated that way in that space. It had something to do with me. And this was something that my parents instilled in me as well. Anytime I had conflict or an issue with somebody, like at school, and I brought it to my parents, the immediate first thing that they would say would be, "What did you do?" This led to my lifetime rock bottom, to be honest. And I was living in Florida. Trump had just won the election. My adopted parents both voted for Trump. I was coming out of a relationship with a white man where part of the reason why the relationship was breaking up was he had a lot of racist friends. And when it came to my career, I had an experience where I just had white people say the thing. I worked in the service industry, out with a group of managers and club owners in Tampa with a friend, and the conversation came up and they just said it. They just said like, oh, we don't put black people, particularly black women, in any positions where they would have access to the safe or behind the bar. Which basically said, you will never be anything but a waitress or a bottle service girl. Bottle service girl? Why do we still call them girls? Woman? Bottle service woman. I just want to correct that. You will never be anything other than that in this town. In this state, fuck it. That's pretty much what they were saying. And I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know what to do with that. My entire life, 27 years at that point, I had always been able to work harder, work around, and I came to a place where I was like, well, I can't do anything about this. And I went into a year of serious suicidal depression. It was my own black existential crisis. So I just want to emphasize, when you are thinking about the perspective in which to see people who've had similar experiences as mine, humanity, look at it like this. Our households didn't talk about race. As much as your household did, as many conversations as your family maybe did about how to protect yourself, how to talk to the police, that the police are fucking dangerous. I didn't know that. I didn't know that until I was like 23. Was in a lot of dangerous situations because no black people in my life would just stop and be like, hey, did you know that the police want to murder us? White people do not talk about race. So if you have a black person that was raised in a predominantly white community or by white parents, your assumptions of their understanding of systematic racism are probably inaccurate. And I need you guys to understand, I was 19 before I understood that there's a difference between saying the N-word with an ER than with an A. And not because I heard the N-word so much growing up. I knew you didn't say it. I only heard it once in 18 years of childhood. I don't know. Call it a privilege. Doesn't mean I didn't suffer from other aspects of racism, but that specific word. I grew up in Washington State, okay? In that part of the country, they aren't less racist. They're just less overt. I did, however, learn that lesson before 20. Almost got my ass kicked in the process, but I did learn it. Made it out alive. Once I was living in a more predominantly black community, there were different struggles. Most black people didn't fuck with me at all. I'm being perfectly honest. And the ones who did were light-skinned women. And the few whites. When I first moved to Texas, I had a fling for about 5 months with a Paul Wall looking white motherfucker. And I used to come over to his house and spoil him with financial gifts, and he would smoke me out and teach me about what the fuck spinning rims are and candy paint means. And that when people called me thick, it wasn't an insult. Like, it was like a whole boot camp, guys. Like, it was a whole thing. I was very studious. But again, if you notice the people that I mentioned, it was light-skinned women, people who are already ostracized, to be honest, from aspects of the black community, and it was the white people within the black community, poor white people that also grew up in the hood. I wanted to just share some of my experiences and try to help all of us empathize better with this experience by explaining to you, I think, the underbelly, the subconscious of what is going on. And I do understand why some of the behaviors that I expressed would be triggering to black people or would trigger their defense mechanisms. Now that I have more understanding, I am now more empathetic as well, and I've been able to heal more. Because these narratives, this brainwashing, it's subconscious. We don't know, we're ignorant, we're traumatized, we're brainwashed, we're not intentionally hateful. Please help us. We can help each other. See what I mean? There's data, information, tricks, little codes that are being said by white people that we understand that a lot of the black community may not, because we were given the cipher for the code. They give it to you in the little white meetings that they have. It's a joke, okay? If you're having white meetings, it's the KKK. Most of us are not Uncle Toms, are not Coons, are not Candace Owensons. Candace Owens? Can we just change Coon to just doing a Candace? Can we, maybe? Okay. We'll vote at the next cookout. We're on the same team. We've all experienced trauma. We are not having Trauma Olympics. We shouldn't be trying to create a hierarchy of trauma. We should just understand that trauma gets expressed differently because trauma is experienced uniquely, diversely, differently. We are stronger and wiser together. You need us and the information from our experiences, and we need you so we can belong to a community. And maybe through this process, for the first time, we can all experience something that looks and feels like home. I'm not a threat. I'm a product of settler colonization, just like you. I'm not a house Negro or a field Negro. I don't need to be defined as dark or light. I don't need to be defined as black or white. I am a fucking human being. Fuck your categories. Human being, fuck your categories. Human being, fuck your categories. Human being, fuck your human being. Fuck him, fuck him, fuck him, human being. For this Encanto section, I am going to be using some clips from the YouTube channel Howard Ho. He does absolutely amazing breakdowns of music theory and the meaning behind it. Encanto is a 2021 movie by the lovely, lovely company of Disney, named after its historically fascist leader, Disney. It was written by Charisse Castro-Smith, Jared Bush, and Byron Howard. It stars a Colombian teenage girl who has to face the frustrations of being the only member of her family without magical powers. And this right now is going to be your spoiler warning. If you have not watched this movie, I am going to spoil the fuck out of it, so please go and watch it now. And then please come back for this analysis, because I actually think that Encanto is a very, very revolutionary, disruptive piece of art that we can learn a lot to for revolutionary action. Because it's all about feelings and healing. I actually have about 4 different analyses and takes I could do for this movie on each character and what they represent. I could do a whole nother video on just Maribel and being an INFJ. But for this video, we are going to use Encanto as an allegory. So Abuelo is going to represent older activist leadership, the way that we have done revolutionary before. Black capitalists who wants everything to stay the same. They just want less oppression because they don't understand those two things cannot happen simultaneously. They are intimately interconnected. Or if they do understand that relationship, they don't actually believe that liberation is a possibility, and so improving the status quo is actually their goal. And personally, I don't want prettier chains. I would like my chains off. Thank you. The house would be a physical representation of the abstract concept of Black culture, our Black community. The house is a representation of our collective magic. Luisa is a great example. Black anarchists, revolutionaries, activists, protectors in certain aspects of our communities. Many Black femmes that still embrace the role of the strong Black woman would also be represented in Luisa. Isabella would represent the ideal Black excellence stereotype, most likely attended an HBCU, joined a sorority, promotes and performs the stereotypical expectations of Black love within the Black community. And I would say the overall pressure put on Black children to create generational wealth for the family and for themselves by denying who they really are and selling and performing their talents for the good of the collective, for the overall Black image, rather than fully allowing them to be themselves. Bruno represents our generational trauma that we clearly don't want to talk about. We'll get more into that in just a bit. And Maribel is a representation of young Black revolutionaries, thought leaders, influencers that have also figured out that there's cracks in our community house, in our culture, and that the magic is dying. And so are we. So the first sequence in the movie, we learn that Abuela is a new mother and is having to escape and run from her home with her husband. The way they visually portrayed the scene, it was very clever, where I do believe this is supposed to be colonizers, but we'll just keep them in the shadows so we don't piss off the executives at Disney. During their attempt to escape, Umbrello's husband sacrifices his life to save the family and their community who is escaping with them. With all three of Umbrello's triplets in her arms, she freely expresses her pain and suffering through the trauma of watching her husband die at the hands of what we're going to assume is colonizers. This expression literally births magic out of nowhere. Her pain and suffering and trauma created magic. That sounds familiar. Does that sound familiar? Like, that kind of sounds familiar. I don't know. It's almost like, we created step and other ways to communicate, music, all sorts of art in our suffering, and we still do. This magic grew, and as Umbrello's children grew up, the magic, or Encanto, blessed them all with gifts. And then when they had children, those children were blessed with gifts. All of the children were blessed with gifts, except for the protagonist of our story, Maribel. By the way, Maribel actually absolutely has gifts. She has one of the most powerful gifts. It's the whole point of the movie. So if you feel like you related and connected with Maribel's character in this movie, please remember that you have amazing, beautiful, magical gifts. Just because they may not look like other people's gifts does not mean that you are not a very valuable, important, amazing, beautiful human that we would like to appreciate your existence and the beauty that your gifts bring to the world. The story communicates to us very quickly that Umbrella runs the ship. Maribel clearly says this in the beginning of the movie. In the first song, it's literally a lyric that Umbrella runs the ship. So we're doing an allegory, so let's not get hung up on gender, but part of what Umbrella represents in the community, like I mentioned before, is our activists and leadership that are still stuck in past ways on how to liberate ourselves. Umbrella and Maribel are actually the only two characters in the movie that can directly speak to the house and actually can direct the house. I think this very clearly represents the relationship between older and younger generations. As we see throughout the movie, Maribel's main focus is individual family members being able to express themselves authentically with who they are. In contrast, Umbrella is solely focused on maintaining the magic based on what they have done before and hindering any new imaginative ideas being expressed by Maribel or by other family members with the encouragement of Maribel. Throughout the movie, Umbrella's communication to individual family members is always about what they can do for the community or for the family. She rarely is seeing each individual family member as a human with their own individual wants and desires. She literally really only speaks to each family member when she is directing them about how to use their gift/magic. And I think this is a great analogy for how older generations within our community sometimes focus too much on children's ability to create generational wealth for the family or to be a positive representation of Black liberation movements. This thought process dehumanizes our children and also goes back to the commodification, fetishization, and adultification that we talked about in earlier chapters. The movie and plot doubles down on poor Maribel's torture of not having any sense of belonging or acceptance within her own family with a scene at our youngest family member's magic ceremony. After Antonio received his gift, Maribel is led to believe that because the magic skipped her, there's something individually wrong with her. And this is reinforced when the family members take a group picture and no one notices that Maribel is not in the picture. What in the actual fuck? When I watched this, I was like, this is cruel. Is this a kid's movie? And then I was like, of course, and these are valuable lessons that kids need to learn because this is actually happening to kids in their lives right now. And what we later find out is there is actually 2 family members missing from this picture, Maribel and Bruno. So even though this looks like a happy family picture, it's a great example of how we put on faces or pretend that problems don't exist in order not to disrupt the harmony of the tribe. But really we end up finding it's because most of them are scared of disappointing Umbrella. So in the movie, when this scene happens and the family takes a broken family picture, Maribel stops to sing a song. And the way that the creators visually represent this is literally time stopping around Maribel. Everyone at the party and the family members are all moving in slow motion. And if this was real life and not a movie, that seems like maybe she got triggered? Like, seriously triggered? First couple lyrics of the song that she sings literally is her telling herself, don't be mad, don't be upset, don't have regret, I'm still part of the family Madrigal. She is literally trying to gaslight herself into believing that this is normal family behavior. The lyrics continue by her saying, I'm fine, I'm totally fine, I will stand on the sidelines while you all shine. Then thank God for Maribel's health. She very quickly gets over that denial, admits that she's not fine, and then proceeds to sing about all of the talents and gifts that she does not possess. And again, she is feeling so hopeless that the chorus of this song is that she is waiting on a miracle, because that's the only hope she sees in trying to be accepted into her family. The lyrics in the song end with her saying, I would heal what's broken, show this family something new, who I am inside, so what can I do? And the last line is, am I too late for a miracle? Immediately after the song ends, Maribel is standing in the middle of the house, and the house starts to fall apart. The cracks in the house go all the way up to the magical candle that brings the Encanto magic, and she interrupts the party to tell Umbrella that the house is cracking and falling apart. And when all of the family members and Umbrella go to see that the house is falling apart, the cracks are not there. It's almost like the house was trying to give her a sign. Umbrella also is quite upset, so is Isabella, by what they think is Maribel just trying to get attention because she doesn't have a gift. And remember, Maribel, the new and next generation of revolutionary liberation leaders who have new and different ideas on how to get to liberation. That night, we get a scene with Umbrella and Maribel listening to Umbrella's cries out to save the magic. Umbrella knows the magic is dying. She knows what she's doing is not working, but she has no other ideas and also will not listen to people in her family or her community. Her unhealed trauma is causing her to cling on to everything around her because she doesn't want to suffer any loss and she feels like she needs to protect her family. She's just not realizing in the process that she is kind of being abusive and controlling to the family that she is trying to protect, not allowing anyone to have individual autonomy or self-expression. I think this is a great representation of a lot of Black leadership, particularly in the last 2 years, not listening to the community, not understanding that the people are kind of done with toxic patriarchy, with anti-trans and queer rhetoric. We don't want to be capitalist, and we're really fucking tired. We're dancing around our house like Maribel, singing songs about waiting on a miracle. So the next day, after Maribel does some snooping and gets a few of her other family members to talk, she learns that Luisa possibly is struggling and losing some of her magic, and so she follows Luisa around and pressures her about it, and actually gets Luisa to talk to her in one of the most amazing songs from this movie, Surface Pressure. And again, for this analogy, Luisa is going to represent a lot of the Black femmes that still take on the role of being the strong Black woman because it's needed in aspects of their community.
So at the end of the chorus, he rhymes all with fall.
Who am I if I can't carry it all if I fall?
But then the word fall becomes
falter,
a tropey word that brings us right back to the verses. It's just another way Lin is showing us that he knows he's stretching out the stresses of lyrical time. Now, if the verse and the chorus show Luisa's world of unending stress, then the bridge shows us what life without stress looks like.
Wait, if I could shake the crushing weight.
Wait, shake, and wait are all single-syllable words. Not only that, but wait and wait are homophones, meaning they sound exactly the same, showing that these rhymes took a lot less effort than the more exotic-sounding rhymes like Cerberus. Not only that, but they are surrounded by way less stress. These two bars have 3 and 2 stresses, respectively. That means we're now down to 0.75 and 0.5 stresses per beat. Truly, this is the less stress paradise that Luisa only dreams of. The only time we even have a longer break in the song between stresses is literally on the word
breaks.
Lin here is using prosody to illustrate the concept of the word breaks by placing a break in the music. He did something similar in the song previously on the word
never stop.
He does this again toward the end of the song when the music itself is helping to supply drum hits that go along with the lyrical stresses, except on the word breaks, where there is a slight break.
No cracks, no breaks.
And finally, the song ends on the word pressure, a final trochee that ends the song the way Luisa fears most, on the weak part of the beat.
No pressure!
Symbolizing how she feels weak and accentuated by the fact that that last syllable is not supported by musical accompaniment, but instead a soft whoosh, which sends her into an anxiety attack. Thankfully, Mirabelle is there to give her a hug, and that is how surface pressure works.
And the one thing that I do want to point out in this song is that in the bridge, when Luisa is able to speak about what she wishes to do, it's literally just rest and have some pleasure. There's also a little moment in the beginning when the song is first starting where you notice that the donkeys are also scared of how Luisa is expressing herself, which I think is a great subtle representation of how no one in that town is going to ask Louise how she's doing. And no one is checking in on Luisa and asking if she's doing okay. You can even notice in the film how the townspeople don't even ask please or say thank you when Luisa is fixing all of their problems. She feels not seen and underappreciated. But the weight of having to protect her family and tribe, pressure from Abuela, it has always been a burden and a stress. And with the added weakening of her magic, she is having a full-blown anxiety attack. And this is confirmed at the end of the song where we find Louisa huffing and puffing, eye-twitching, and Mirabelle just gives her a big hug. She just hugs her sister. And that was exactly what Louisa needed. Then Louisa opened up and Mirabelle got the information she needed to try to fix the magic, which is Bruno. Now, let's talk about Bruno. This song is a perfectly harmonized, gaslighting masterpiece. The horrible gift that Bruno was given was being able to get visions of the future. Well, to be more specific, get visions of the possibilities of the passing of time. In the song, there are 3 townspeople who said they got visions. One of them was told they were going to get a gut, another one of them was told that they were going to go bald, and another one was told that their fish were going to die. These are not necessarily visions or prophecies, as much as they represent the possibilities of change that time brings. So the reason that no one talks about Bruno and that we have not seen Bruno in the story yet was because Bruno's prophecies scared Abuela. They told her that change was coming and change scared her. So she and other family members shunned Bruno and his magical gift until he chose to leave. Damn, that is cruel as fuck. Is this still a Disney movie? Oh my god. But does that not sound familiar about an aspect of the Black community that's oftentimes getting kicked the fuck out of their house and is now homeless? Queer and trans people. Damn, no wonder this movie was so popular. This movie is dealing with a lot of family and childhood trauma that a lot of people have not processed. Okay, a couple other things that we learn is that Dolores can actually hear Bruno in the walls, meaning that Bruno hasn't actually left. And Dolores, one of the family members, has known for years that he's been living in the walls and hasn't said anything. Poor Bruno. Bruno has probably got some serious abandonment issues.
So this augmented chord perfectly describes a future that is not yet written. The problem is that Bruno did seem to write the future, which is why Abuela had rejected him for fear that his predictions would come to pass. But what Abuela didn't realize,
the future was undecided,
was that Bruno's predictions were not predictions, but warnings of what would happen if generational trauma was not dealt with. It all comes back to we don't talk about Bruno. See, in the song, she gets everyone to talk about Bruno and gets the Madrigal family to sing a polyphonic madrigal. And if all of these voices are singing independently, there's a very big chance people will sing at the wrong place or in the wrong key or out of tune. At the center of this madrigal choir, you need a conductor, someone who will keep time and keep everyone on the same page. In fact, keeping people in time is another connection Mirabelle has with Bruno. Bruno's magical symbol is the hourglass, which measures time. And many of Bruno's predictions have to do with the change that time causes, like a fish dying of old age or a person's hair falling out from getting older. And so Mirabelle is in charge of keeping track of time, but also keeping track of the change that time causes for the Madrigal family. And that's why Mirabelle doesn't appear to have a gift. Think about it. An orchestra can be made up of more than 100 talented musicians, each one exceptionally gifted at their own particular instrument. But the musician with the greatest impact on the orchestra isn't someone who plays any instrument at all. It's the person who conducts, who keeps time, who is completely silent and yet is completely vital to the way all the gifted players come together to play in harmony. That's why Mirabelle and Bruno are connected through their green color motifs. Bruno with his green clothes and eyes that turn green, and Mirabelle with her green glasses, because green is traditionally a symbol of change, growth, new beginnings, and yes, harmony. That's why Abuela also has no powers. She was the conductor before, but now needs to pass the baton, because someone will be needed to take over the conducting position for Abuela, and the casita chose Mirabelle. It's no mistake that both Abuela and Mirabelle seem to have a very strong relationship with the casita. Mirabelle even seems to understand the casita.
Oh, I have no idea.
Just like how Antonio understands animals.
I understand you.
Abuela and Mirabel may be at odds in the story, but in reality, they are two sides of the same coin. Neither is the villain of the story. In fact, the true villain is implied by the song We Don't Talk About Bruno. No, the villain is not Bruno, even though everyone has a problem with him. The true villain is revealed when you look between the lines at what the song is saying. The townspeople complain that Bruno told them something bad would happen.
He told me my fish would die the next day.
No, Bruno didn't bring about these changes. He just talked honestly about them. Bruno was merely the messenger. And because Abuela was averse to any imperfection in her perfect image of the Madrigal family, she rejected not just the idea of change, but also its messenger. It's sort of like how joy doesn't let sadness do her thing because it's not ideal, even though yes, sadness is a normal, healthy part of life too.
One other thing I did want to mention is that Isabella is the one family member who, when they talk about their prophecy from Bruno, it seems positive. She sings it while she's smiling and on a beautiful flower swing, but we learn a little bit later in the movie that this is all an act. She doesn't want to marry anybody, which means Bruno prophesying that she was going to marry somebody and have this perfect life is actually her motherfucking nightmare. But because she is also under the pressure of Umbrella and what is expected of her, she reinforces the cruelty to Maribel, specifically in a lyric in this song where she tells Maribel that she doesn't want a sound out of her. Like, poor Maribel. In this movie, we've had her lovely, beautiful, smiling, singing family tell her that she has no gifts, that she needs to sit down and get out of the way, that she needs to stop talking and be silent. Like, putting a fun bop and a good Disney animation to a story really can make what's going on seem a little less traumatic. The song's finale is a perfectly harmonized intermingling of all of the individual family members versed during the song. It is an actual representation of the family harmoniously gaslighting one family member about another family member around the dinner table. And by the end of the song, Maribel is wondering, maybe I shouldn't talk about Bruno. And remember, in this allegory, Bruno is generational trauma.
We have to discuss everything that makes this song so amazing. First of all, yes, it's a song sung by the Madrigal family, but in a way it's also a type of modern madrigal. So what is a madrigal? Well, it's a type of choral piece that had its heyday in the Renaissance. It was known for being polyphonic, meaning many sounds, or in this case, many voices. Each voice is singing a slightly different melody, creating a sense of a tapestry where every voice is like a thread that weaves into a larger whole. And the epic ending of the song We Don't Talk About Bruno combines all the melodies we previously heard in the song into a glorious Madrigal family madrigal. Back to opera.
With music, you can have 20 individuals all talking at the same time, and it's not noise, it's a perfect harmony.
But within this danceable energy, each melody has to delicately fit with the others so that each one gets its turn to shine and be heard. Kind of like how every family member has their own role to play in the Madrigal family, just like the singers in a choir singing a madrigal.
We Don't Talk About Bruno is representing how the Black community doesn't want to talk about a lot of our generational trauma that we have not healed from, and our trauma responses are actually greatly harming other members of our community. So part of what I did in this documentary was I talked about Bruno. We're addressing some of the Brunos in the Black community. Trauma that we are still dealing with from slavery, colorism, the systematic, structural, sexual abuse of our children, particularly Black men, and the toxic white patriarchy that doesn't support them or give space for them to express themselves or their traumas and pains. We don't talk about the trauma that the community has done to transracial adoptees and mixed kids, and the trauma that is collectively shared from our enslaved ancestors of having to RAP each other while also being RAP. That is an untalked about generational trauma that is still plaguing our romantic relationships today. Romantic partners and relationships are also looked at as transactional relationships to get material needs that individuals want. In the next scene, the entire family is at the dinner table, and Isabella's male suitor is there to propose with his mother. And obviously this evening goes completely awry and turns into complete chaos after Dolores, who hears everything, spills the secret that Maribel is aware of Bruno's visions. And of course, because Disney is determined to show us the cruelty of families in this movie, everyone blames Maribel for the disastrous dinner party, and Isabella even tells Maribel that she hates her. Maribel then finds out that Bruno has been living in the walls. He literally found a spot in the walls that is right next to the family's dinner table. So not only has Bruno been living in the house with the family without the family knowing for years, but he's been sitting at his own lonely, abandoned table directly behind the wall of the family's dining room. That is so fucking sad. And also a great analogy for how important belonging is for human beings. So after talking to Bruno, Maribel convinces Bruno to use his magic again to have another vision, possibly help her with what to do. This vision shows her that she needs to heal a relationship within the family. The way that they see the vision, it shows that she needs to heal the relationship with her sister, Isabella. So, in probably one of my favorite scenes, because Maribel is just so fucking adorable asking her sister for a hug, Maribel goes to try to reconcile with her sister.
Just gonna save the miracle with a hug. Okay, get over here. Bring it in. Wait, bring it in, bring it in. Bring it in, bring it in.
Isabella responds to Maribel's attempts at reconciliation and apology for ruining her engagement in rage. And in that rage, her magic makes a flower that isn't perfect. She makes a cactus, and then during Isabella's song, she opens up to Maribel and expresses that all the perfectness that Maribel was seeing in Isabel was a performance. She doesn't want to get married and have 5 babies. She probably wants to dance around the forest introvertedly and make cacti. And I really support that for Isabella, because I'm going to be honest, she's kind of a bitch. The scene ends with the 2 girls falling into a pile of petals and flowers. Isabella's hair is wild, different colors, and she's found a part of herself. And then enters Umbrella to absolutely squash any of that self-expression. Maybe Umbrella's the black church. Is Umbrella the black church? Is Umbrella white Christianity? I don't know. To my black people that still go to White Jesus Christian Church, it's been almost 280 years. I'm gonna need you to realize that that ain't our Jesus. That ain't our God, and he don't give a fuck about us. I'm just saying, how long do we want to worship a religion that was used to enslave us? Also, maybe we should consider the fact that it's typically black pastors and reverends, cis men, that have been the patriarchal face of our liberation movements. And if our ancestral history is rooted in matriarchal communities and leadership, I'm not sure why we think patriarchal tactics will liberate us from our oppression. And even though I might be emphasizing on black men and the white patriarchy, these narratives are also perpetuated by black women in these leadership spaces. Some people might not like this take, but I think a great example of this is the Black Lives Matters organization. Not the Black Lives Matters hashtag or movement, but the actual Black Lives Matters international organization. And a lot of the scandals and corruption and capitalism that has been going on behind the scenes, and a lot of the individual leaders that use this movement and message and black bodies and our pain to profit personally and create, guess what? Their own generational wealth. It's the excuse that black people always use to be able to do a black capitalism. Black capitalism is not liberation. Black capitalism is the false hope of more comfortable gold-plated chains. So Umbrella comes in to find Maribel and Isabel laughing and smiling in a flowery pile of self-expression. So Umbrella immediately starts yelling and chastising Maribel for being a bad influence on Isabella. Maribel is trying to explain to Umbrella that Luisa and Isabella aren't happy, and that knowledge could help them save the magic. And Umbrella does not listen, does not hear her, does not see her, yells over her to basically shut the fuck up, and then tells Maribel that it's her fault that Isabella's proposal went wrong, even though Isabella does not want the proposal, that it's Maribel's fault that the house is cracking, basically that everything is her fault. Again, this is such a common experience for a lot of children in this country, but it just sits differently when you're breaking it down from a Disney movie, because it's just so beautiful and colored, and then you have to sit and think, did they really do a movie about this abusive grandmother? And Buela's last comment to Maribel is that she doesn't know why Maribel didn't get a gift, but that Maribel not getting a gift is not an excuse for Maribel to destroy the family. God damn, this woman is harsh. Destroy the family. Like, literally, Maribel's been running around trying to save family based on hearing Umbrella cry out for help. And then Umbrella, in front of the whole family, tells her that she's destroying it. And then we get a tough, but also liberating moment where Maribel stands up to Umbrella and says that Maribel is realizing no one in the family is ever going to be good enough for Umbrella. Maribel is incorrect that Umbrella doesn't care about family, but Umbrella has lost sight of caring about the individuals in the family, and Maribel is right about this. She then also gets bold and correctly states that Umbrella's toxic behavior is actually what is breaking the home and destroying the family. And then, at the climax of this fight, the miracle dies. The magic goes out. Well, you don't say. A house that was literally incepted from the suffering and pain of family and connection starts to fall apart when that family and connection is broken. It's brilliant, and it's the exact message we need right now. So as the house is cracking and crumbling and beginning to fall, each of the house members are trying to help but are losing their magic. Maribel risks everything to try to save the miracle candle and the Encanto. She fails. As the family is sitting in the wreckage of their home, Maribel looks at Umbrella, who's distraught, and I think she feels like Bruno, that she needs to go away for the family to be saved, and so she runs away. And thank goodness for our hearts and souls in this movie, Umbrella learns and goes to find Maribel. And then comes the beautiful song and montage that made me bawl my eyes out, to be honest.
Each note you are hearing from the tiple is actually 3 strings plucked together, sounding like this one guitar is actually 3 guitars, echoing our theme of 3. 3. And it should be no surprise that the song is also structured in 3 parts, beginning, middle, end, that tell the story of 2 caterpillars, or oruguitas, which begin not just with caterpillars, but with little caterpillars, as indicated by the ITA added at the end of the word oruga, meaning that oruguitas is a diminutive form of the original word, implying that these caterpillars might be younger, corresponding to our young lovers. Then, in the next section of the song, the caterpillars must separate to form a chrysalis, where they cocoon. Then, in the final section of the song, the caterpillars are no longer caterpillars, but mariposas, butterflies, and must learn to fly off to the future, which is a perfect metaphor not only for the transformation happening in the family, but also for the specific way that Bruno, who represents the future, will have to be reintegrated to make that future possible. But we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg of Dos Oruguitas, because when you zoom into the heart of the song, the true meaning of 3 finally reveals itself. It's just one measure of a descending harp line in a triplet rhythm. And if you're wondering why triplets are being featured so prominently in this melody when so far we've associated it with Mirabel, well, at the exact moment we hear the triplet descending line, we see this shot. That's right, it's a shot of the triplets, Julieta, Bruno, and Peppa as infants. The entire time Mirabel was singing in triplets, it was because she wanted to fix the family, to restore the 3-ness to the family, which meant rehabilitating Bruno back into the family, thus completing the set of triplets. Mirabel's 3-ness may have felt odd and out of place, but really it was something that was missing and needed at the heart of this family, until Mirabel came along and brought it back. If you're thinking that they aren't triplets, well, the film actually confirms it. Earlier, we see Abuela reveal to Pedro that she is having triplets with the paper cutout. And of course, when the 3 triplets reunite, Agustin says, "The triplets are reunite!" In a way, each of the triplets represents the structure of the song, past, present, and future. Julieta uses food to heal the wounds of the past. Peppa's control of the weather is temperamental and always very present. And Bruno's visions are of the future. Lin definitely knew they were triplets as he was involved from the early stages of the film, and I have no doubt, being the chess player that he is, Lin prepared us for this moment in the most elegant way possible, where Abuela is now a single mother in a strange place, and she sees before her the key to her own future, her triplets, musically scored with triplets. Though we've largely solved the mystery of 3, Lin saves one more 3-ity for the end of the song, his checkmate moment. And it all has to do with the idea of Abuela seeing her own future in these children. In Dos Oruguitas, the final lyric of each chorus is on the words, "Su propio futuro," which means their own future. And so it's in the song Dos Oruguitas that we see Abuela finally sharing how it felt to be displaced by war, to lose her husband, and to raise triplets all on her own. Abuela finally releases her feelings about this painful past to Mirabel, who was gifted all along with the powers of empathy and being able to open people's eyes to who they really are.
Open your eyes, open your eyes.
Abuela realizes that her fear of losing everything again has made her rigid, controlling, and ultimately hurtful. That rather than predetermining someone's life through categorizing them by their gifts, each person is like an augmented cord, with the potential to go almost anywhere they want to go.
Through the song of Dos Oruguitas, Umbrella finally shares, processes, and begins to heal from her past trauma. By sharing her past trauma, Umbrella is able to begin the healing process, not only in her relationship with Mirabel, but also with her family and with herself. And we see in Maribel's response to Umbrella sharing her trauma and being vulnerable, Maribel is able to come to understanding, and the relationship is able to heal. Embracing change is not difficult, it's uncomfortable. You cannot grow without embracing change. Without embracing change, You can't fully become who you truly are. You're unable to effectively provide and protect your community. If we do not embrace change, we cannot rebuild our home. After Bruno, Umbrella, and Marabella return to their town's members come to collectively take care of their community. And they're able to rebuild the house together as a community. And through the experience of rebuilding the house, the town becomes a closer community, the family of Madrigals become closer, and through the acceptance of Maribel, she literally as the conductor, restores the family harmony and opens the door into the Madrigals' new and liberated future. The magic and encanto is restored to the Madrigal home.
In the film, the line is sung over this augmented chord, and the chord never resolves, but instead hangs in the air, as if Abuela has finally come to peace with the idea of letting her family determine their own futures. Because it's at this very moment of this lingering augmented chord that Bruno bursts on screen, this character who symbolizes the future, and the first thing Abuela does is embrace Bruno. And by doing so, not just embraces him, but also the uncertainty of the future as well, allowing her family to fly into the future. With perhaps a new queen on the board.
I'm sure everyone, no matter your identity, resonated with more than one character throughout this movie. And it's because we're all alienated, lonely, depressed, and or traumatized in some form. That's what capitalism does. It robs your childhood, your imagination, your self-expression, your mental health, your tribe, your community, your humanity, your life, and your belonging.
It's being aware of our multiple identities, our many ways of belonging, that can actually help solve the problem. Because now, when I meet a stranger who seems different from me in a scary way, chances are that in some other way, we're both in the same group.
Your group could be people who have a kind heart, people who care about each other. You could define your group in many different ways. So I think we have to actually help people imagine the future so people quit turning to the past. But we haven't really exercised that.
The way we work together needs to deliver security for all of us. That should be the precondition. In the context of thinking about the pandemic, the way I put it is, the starting point for a governance conversation is we're not going to abandon anybody. We're not abandoning the elderly. We're not abandoning the young. We're not abandoning people of color. We're not abandoning people who are in prisons. Because otherwise, you don't have a social contract. You might as well just give up and go home because you just ruined the whole thing.
The way we think about these things, the culture and the leadership matters a lot so that we can sort of activate certain parts of the imagination.
And John, right now we seem to have a lot of leaders internationally that appeal to this more primitive side of our brain, the side of the brain that allows us to feel comfortable in a small group.
I think that's right.
And it's gonna take all of us.
So originally I hadn't added this section into the script, but as I was working on this video essay this week, Professor Flowers released her most recent video on moving forward and her experience with the leftist space online, white space and spaces behind the scenes with people of color. And it's interesting, the timing. The notification for Professor Flowers' video on my YouTube came up literally as I was just getting ready to record the last half of this video, and something in me said, stop. Watch the whole video before you film your video. And that's why I'm having to add this section in here. I am not going to go back over any of the drama and the horrific abuse that Professor Flowers has suffered the last few months. But I do want to touch on why this topic is so important to me and why it needs to be so important to the Black community. I do not stress about content or creating spaces or performing for audiences that are racially mixed, for audiences that are predominantly white. Nothing Nothing compares to the anxiety and the pressure that is put on Black people who are visible or have audiences in this country. That's what breaks us. It's not the white people. It's not the colonizers. It's when we come to the space that we thought was safe because that's what people that look like us said, and then we find out it wasn't safe. As children of transracial adoption or interracial relationships, we are never going to be accepted in white spaces, but it oftentimes feels like we also will never get accepted in Black spaces. No matter how comfortable we may look or how easily we may navigate white spaces, we do not feel comfortable in those spaces. We oftentimes aren't fully seen in Black spaces, or even, worstly, looked at as tainted by the colonizer, by the slave master. And I want the Black community and Black people to consider that if we've shown up in a predominantly Black space as someone who was raised by white people, that in itself is an act of rebellion. We didn't get there by selling out to white people. We didn't find Black spaces by selling out to white people. Many of us either have fragile relationships or, like myself, are estranged from our white parents, especially once you get into the Black Lives Matter activist space. These boundaries and rules and limits, expectations for acceptance into predominantly Black spaces or all Black spaces or spaces for people of color are harmful and violent to Black people who were raised by white people. Based on the trauma and experiences that I have gone through in my life, I'm not supposed to be here. I want to emphasize so that you understand what I'm saying, so I don't have to say it, for terms of service. I'm not supposed to be here. As a Black person with this childhood experience, the battle I had to go through to just get to a Black space was a struggle in its own, was its own trauma. And then to get there and to find out that I'm not Black enough for that space either, even being told that from people who are whiter skinned than I am, I'm gonna say it again. It's violent. Ignoring people of color who grew up in these households is violent. The first time I experienced this from the Black community was from a Black man, by the way. One of my first traumatic racial experiences that I remember was from a Black man, calling me an Oreo, telling me that being adopted had allowed me to flourish in a way that no other Black women that he's ever been around have, as well as repeating that I should have been grateful for all of the material privilege that I was able to be raised in. I have laid awake at night, ridden with anxiety because of something I was doing in a predominantly Black space in the next day or week. I have censored myself more in Black spaces. I have to put a mask on oftentimes in Black spaces. I preemptively self-deprecate about behaviors I know that I have that are going to be considered white by the group of Black people that I'm in. This isn't right, and I am not alone. For the future of humanity, but at least Black people's liberation, we have to come together on this topic, as well as on colorism and the whole Black men, Black women when it comes to dating, but I'm not touching those right now. This video essay is already long enough. But honestly, these things are not only tearing us apart within our own community, but they are killing some of us. So please stop judging us for having white friends or white partners. Please stop telling us things that we do or say is white people shit.
Especially because when it comes to culture in America, it's like all our shit. You know, Black people, it's like mostly our shit. All we're asking is for you to allow us to show up in spaces fully as we are, be seen as a whole human, validate our existence, give us space for our trauma, collaborate with our strengths and knowledge, and let's stand together with each other instead of fighting people on our own team.